My name is John Mancini. I'm going to be the moderator of this event here today. And we're focused on this question of Microsoft as your automation platform. And more specifically, this notion of what are the benefits, what are the costs, what are the issues involved in consolidating some of your cloud platforms and standardizing on Microsoft as an automation platform. And we're going to try to focus on examples of this, on some of the risks, on some case studies associated with that. I'll direct your attention to the questions tab. It's a more dynamic questions tab than you might be used to in the past. If you see a question that pops up there and you want to answer it, please have at it. There's always benefit in tapping into the wisdom of the crowd in terms of getting answers to some of the questions that people ask. You also have a little upvote, downvote kind of functionality that you can use if you want to highlight a particular question for Scott and Janice to answer along the way. And I should add that this whole series is brought to you by DocPoint, and DocPoint has rich expertise in the M365 Microsoft arena. That's complemented by also knowledge of some of the other content management platforms that are out there. And so a lot of their work is focused on trying to help people figure out the connections between the two and when you need one and when you need the other. The other thing that I think they're particularly skilled at is that they focus a lot on understanding complex business processes and mapping those business processes into technical solutions. And so we're really grateful that DocPoint is sponsoring this. And without further ado, let's introduce ourselves here. I'm John Mancini. I used to run AIM for a gazillion years. I do a fair amount of work with DocPoint and QAI. I'm also the author of a book called Immigrant Secrets on Records and Archives. And so let's see, Scott, why don't you take it away?
Sure will. All right. Thank you, John. I'm Scott Money, Director of Operations with DocPoint Solutions. And I want to thank you all for joining us here today. And Janice, you want to say a quick hello?
Hello, everyone. I'm JEANESE Raymond. I'm a Regional Operations Director for DocPoint Solutions.
All right. Well, John, thank you for that introduction. You always make me feel important than I think I really am, so I appreciate that. It's great when you join these sessions and keep us in line. So yeah, a little bit more on the introduction. So you may have met some of our staff. I know some of you have met Janice before. We have done other webinars more along the technical side. Some of our other team members have participated in used to be the SharePoint Fest, the EduCon, TechCon events. Most recently, Janice filled a room. We actually had the fire marshal in there telling people we had too many people in a room, they had to leave. So we'll be doing that again coming up in the fall. So as I mentioned, most of our presentations are on the technical side. That's where we spend most of our time. So that includes things like migrations, implementations, architecture. This session is going to be a little bit different. We felt that we would bring more value if we talked about all of these aspects from the business side. So not so technical, but more about what does this platform do? Is it a good fit for everyone? And also, sharing some of those experiences that we've had with our customers. Some of our customers are all in on 365. Some of them not quite just yet. Many are still hybrid. So there's not one decision that's going to fit everybody. For time for this session, we're shooting for about 30-35 minutes. That was what we're estimating. That's the maximum for my attention span. Janice is good for a little bit longer, and so is John, but I'm 30-35 in a webinar is good for me. So that's going to be our target time. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, there's four main things, and a lot of this has to do with duplicate subscriptions and finding which platform is right for you. Increasing costs is one of the things we're encountering across the board, all the platforms. Using existing platform subscriptions with M365, so sometimes we're not using what we already are paying for. What some of those examples look like, the trends we're seeing, and also the benefits and risks as well. So we'll talk about all of these things and a couple more things as well. User adoption is something else we're gonna touch base on. That's also a really, really big factor. All right, so what initiates all these conversations? Well, it's the same, for the most part, it's the same stories. We talk about aging infrastructure. It can be servers, operating systems. It can be your virtual rack of hardware, deprecated features. I'm going to come back to that one. Rising renewal costs. You're going to hear that over and over and over again. Maybe something's not the right fit. You have new business needs, or your business needs have changed. Or even just the underutilization of your current subscriptions with M365. So pretty much everyone has a 365 subscription or are using the Azure resources that are available. But that doesn't mean everyone's using them. I'm going to go back to deprecated features. When we talk about that, it's not just a platform that's end of life. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Often it's just a feature within that platform. So if we talk about the SharePoint, we're talking about the workflow engines reaching end of life. That's April 2026, I believe. That's still the date. And what will happen with that, Janice? We have no idea. Will it be extended? We don't know.
And it's not, it's a third, isn't it all third party add-ins will no longer?
In some capacity, right. That's become a little more difficult even in the SharePoint Onlines as well, with the store going away.
But that's where we're seeing an overlapping features of these tools, which we'll get into shortly.
Exactly. And we've even seen some of the major players, they may have just one feature deprecated, not necessarily a service. Maybe it's their forms and workflow component that's end of life, and it's going to a whole new code base. So that has to change. All kinds of different reasons why we have to look at migrating this content. All right. So be very clear here. We are not picking on anyone. We're looking at this from a very, very high level. These are all platforms. They're used for different business needs in some capacity, and they also overlap in others. So what we're hearing is that a lot of agencies and businesses, they don't want to have two platforms that do exactly the same thing. They'd rather use one. We don't need 3 workflow solutions unless it's absolutely necessary. But when we look at the cost of these, we mentioned before, they're always rising. We want to make sure we're not just paying for something that we're not using. And we'll get into some examples of that a little bit later. So you can see some of these are actually applications. We're looking at an Intex, Highland OnBase. Some of these are just housing data. Some of these are housing data and images. So we have a little bit different business need there. But what we don't want to do is have multiple platforms doing the same, capable of handling the same business task.
Well, that leads into just governance problems.
It does. That's a great point. And some of those have been around so long. Business may pick up another application, and then we start having those overlaps. That's a great point, Janice, because sometimes that gets away from us. And then you get into issues with security, and maybe someone's not managing that the way it should be. Yeah, that's a great point. So our subscriptions, we talked about this before. This is one of the key players when we're trying to get into figuring out which one we should go with. It's the 365 environment that constantly comes up in these discussions. So are you using it to its full capacity? That's something that oftentimes we don't know, or the answer is no. Does that mean that everything should go into it? Not necessarily. So being careful with this also, the perception sometimes is that these environments, I'm not going to pick on Microsoft, but in some capacity, in 365, we don't see an invoice for that. I see an invoice every month for our development environment, so I get that one every month. But in an agency, sometimes large corporations, the business units within those agencies or businesses, I should say, they never see that invoice of what am I spending on my Azure resources, any custom connectors, am I doing pay as you go? And Janice, this also impacts the third parties as well.
It does. And in some of the cases where we see, while the corporate organization will pay for that M365 subscription, the business unit bears the burden of the third-party tool to solve their business problems if it's not an enterprise solution. That's where we're seeing a lot of the impact coming in, because these departments and divisions and organizations, they have a small budget and they're always balancing, how do I get new stuff put in? And what we're seeing is this this increasing cost is forcing them to look, how do I do more with my money?
Right. Exactly. You know, and I think you mentioned you always see that invoice coming from your third party every month. You don't see that necessarily, not for everyone. Most people don't see that bill that's coming in on the 365 side. And that's something we're working on as a team, trying to figure out what is the actual cost of each one of those components that we're using in that stack. All right, making the decision. So this is at your managers and directors and C levels. They have to make this decision. Do I keep these applications that I'm currently using? Do I need 3 platforms to do what I need to do? Do I need 2 CRM tools? I've had them in place for 15 years. Do I still need them? Probably not. You probably don't need both. I wouldn't imagine you'd need both. But looking at all these aspects of trying to figure out what comes into play to make this decision. So what's the best fit for us? Cost, meeting business needs, and also security are 3 key players there. It can be one individual, maybe it's 2 of those that are the primary, but those are 3 key items. And as we were working through this whole discussion, Janice, we came up with one that absolutely shouldn't be overlooked as well. And I'll let you cover that part.
Well, and I understand the different size of organizations. Security in some, very important. And I'm not mitigating cost either, but from a end user adoption perspective, which is where our team spends most of our time, is delivering solutions for people. We're seeing that user adoption and that user experience is not spent enough time in. And what I mean by that is, let's take a look at some systems, and I'm not picking on any, but some have been around for 25 years. We still have the DOS-based type of interface. They look like forms. When you move to the new process, what will it look like? Do we have an adoption problem? Is it an interface that's customizable? Can we make it consistent so those are all things I can't stress that enough. I've spent so many times doing this for organizations where we're vetting, but when you're vetting a platform of M365, you're not looking at just a forms and automation tool. You're looking at, how can I take what I have today and modernize it? And that's a hefty decision, and it's worth spending that time in. It's a little bit more effort than some people take, but I've seen where that decision is rushed and then it fails for adoption significantly.
Right. Great point. And we didn't even throw this in the deck, but also when we talk about the whole user experience, there's other items that come into play with that. We have the 508 compliance as well. That fits in there. So we have all kinds of rules in that area with it can be the way the wireframes are created, the way the screen readers read top to bottom, fonts, colors. I mean, there's all kinds of things that come into play with that.
But, and that's a great opportunity you're bringing up, because, years past, we didn't have the ability to provide interfaces for people with, color vision impairment. And now we can offer that opportunity.
Right. And probably better tools out there as well, evaluation tools than there were in the past. So, but that's something, we can't stress that enough. The user adoption is so important, and it's a challenge a lot of the times. It really is.
It definitely is, Scott. That's the biggest challenge we see, and it requires change management up front, and lots of other things, and we can discuss that later. But cost, security, important, but user adoption, I agree, is highly rated for me up there.
Right. All right, let's jump to our next. So making that decision. Usually what we hear, our experience when we're working with our customer base, is leadership wants to use what we have, right? You already have this bundled subscription. You have all kinds of features. Again, not everything is in this screen. There are way too many things. We talked about, I believe, co-pilots and records management items in our last webinar. That's recorded. You can go check that out as well. We couldn't put everything in here, but most of our core efforts are under automation, management of content, and development. So what we see is those tools that are available to our customers. SharePoint Online, obviously very, very popular. The whole Power Automate suite, Power App suite. We've been using Blazor as well as a development platform. Purview, and then of course all our data storage, Databricks, Data Lake, Dataverse, and even SQL, hosted SQL Server. Trying to figure out which one of those configurations is best for your customer needs.
Well, and what I like about this, Scott, and we see this so many times as companies, move to this platform, given the right opportunity, I don't have to use one tool. And that's where we talk about and where we get the perception of maybe M365 could do everything for me that I don't have other core ERP systems or HR systems doing. But we can take these in flavors appropriate for making it a best fit solution for the customer. Like the Power BI reporting, I can have all my reports come out of Power BI, but my data sources could live in different places. So I'm constantly giving people, using these tools, hopefully the right fit. And we have several customer success stories that we've been able to apply these tools with.
Right. Yeah, and even from the Dataverse side, storing content in your Dataverse, you don't have to retrieve that from the Microsoft environment. You can pull that from somewhere else as well. There's plenty of connectors out there. So even centralizing all of your data in Dataverse, and of course you use everything on top of that to bring that data to light. So it's not like you can only use that for a Microsoft type platform. It can be used across the board. Different apps.
Good point, Scott, that it's now more agnostic than it used to be.
Agreed. All right. Let's go to examples. Do you want to grab the first one there, Janice?
Yes, this was such a fun effort. I believe they had 6+ years daily use. It was really nice to see this SharePoint environment that was using a third-party plugin for their forms and automation. They had streamlined so many processes across the organization for their internal. And what I came up is they, were looking and the cost of the third-party tool increased. And some of the features, the workflow engine was being deprecated. So it was time to make a decision of where's the right place. And we were able to do with them a very good assessment process. We looked at how they were using the forms and workflows and evaluated. They were hoping that their M365 platform would work. And in this scenario, all the features that were being used were native in the M365 platform and none were premium features. So as I said, they had an extensive SharePoint environment with internal processes. So what we did, there was no migration. We went in and we used the customized form on the SharePoint list because that's how it was being used before. And then we created automation process flows in the background. One of the big surprising benefits that the customer walked away with from a user adoption was they were very used to having the approval opportunity in the third-party tool. What moving into M365 gave them was they didn't have to rely on that email notification. We had trained them to go to their approvals in the Power Automate suite, and that provided an great user adoption and provided an opportunity while a feature or an opportunity wasn't deprecated, we were able to still give them the need to approve centrally, but the process changed, which is a big point when we're moving from systems, especially 6+ years, the interfaces are different. Sometimes we can't do it exactly the same way, but gave them this tool. They're operating and have been self-sufficient because they have a very good internal technical team.
Yeah. We have a couple questions coming in, Janice. Before I jump to those, with that experience, we talk about user adoption. How was that handled? Was that an upfront during the analysis, kind of show this way may be what it looks like?
Yes,
How did we
it,
handle
I from years of experience of user adoption, I like to understand up front what their forms look like today, what their reports, what their interface. But I also like to hear, and that's the big point. You're listening for things such as, we'll take something as simple as a search screen. If they start saying, well, it takes, how many times do you have to perform a search? And you start hearing their issues when you provide them a look and feel of the user interface you always want to address. I heard we had to do multiple searches, but using this new way, you can do multiple searches and never leave the screen and get your results filtered automatically. So those are some opportunities, and it's really more focusing on that change management up front, ensuring that the users are comfortable with how it's going to change and look. And it's not always being, yeah, we can do it. It's being honest and saying this changes, but then here's your benefit. And more often than not, the benefits are I can do my job faster and I have one place for everything I need to approve.
Yeah, that always seems to be an obvious, a big plus. Yeah, and that one went really well. I remember that engagement. So I'm going to grab just one question. Would you consider Power Apps to be a COTS product? I can take a stab at that one. Do you want me to take a stab first? We may have different opinions on this.
You go first.
So I think it depends on who you ask. From my point of view, it sort of is. From a developer's and from our team's experience, it's probably more a developer's tool. And I think you've heard that a million times, than it is probably drag and drop off the shelf. This action does this, this does this. It's similar, but I'm not sure I would call it a COTS product. What do you think, Janice, on that one?
It is definitely not. Yes, M365, we have the productivity suite, that's COTS. But everything else, the Azure, the Power BI, the SharePoint, that's all building blocks that companies can use to automate their processes, streamline whatever they need, centralize data. I like to think of the M365 in my world as the piece that the ERP system doesn't handle, and maybe your HR system or any other system. And it's a middleware that you can use to bring that data together and do things. So I think it's more customizable and develop a tool.
Yeah, good points. We get different feedback on that. Depends on who you ask. Let's see. So let me go to case 2. I'll cover that one. So this was, if I explain this, the best way to explain this, when I say 3 years of daily use, there were actually 3 years before that. It was on another platform. So they went to one CRM type platform. They were mandated to go to another CRM type platform. Neither one of those were a fit for this. So this was like a case tracking system, so to speak. So it was heavily customized in the last 3 years to make that work. It was overkill. We're talking about a mammoth type CRM system, and they were using like this much of it. And that had to be heavily customized. So it just wasn't a fit for the business. So again, this was an example of using the subscriptions that they had available to them. This was built. We ended up building this for this group using the Blazor development platform. Dataverse came up in this. They didn't need Dataverse, so that's another cost saving. Because of the amount of content they had stored, the team was actually able to take that out, put that in a hosted SQL environment in Azure within the agency. So time savings, we saved on subscriptions. I think the cost to build that was just slightly over half what the next renewal was going to be. and it was not cheap. This group had an excellent, you mentioned that the case one there were really strong resources at that customer site. This was the same example. This is a very, very capable group, super sharp developers, and they wanted to build it. They said, we can build it for way cheaper than what we're paying for subscription. So in this case, it worked out really, really well. I think it was a 6-month build, and we're talking millions in savings. So you can't beat that. So in this case, it was a perfect fit. That's not always what we run into when we're building custom from scratch, as we know. But in this case, there is a fit for it. So when we talk about that, can it do everything? Well, you can build anything you want to, right? It's just a matter of time, resources, and it becomes a dollars conversation, obviously, as well. Let's see, we're good on time. We're getting there. Let's see, we want to go to let's hit our next one here. We talked about examples. Get all my windows out of the way and get to my next slide here, I hope. Benefits. All right, who's going first? You want me to go first?
I prefer the risk side.
Okay, let's do the risks. All right. So first on my list is overdevelopment. So when we say overdevelopment, I'm talking about the idea, the old expression, putting a square peg in a round hole. We don't want to force an application into a platform. Sometimes there's other off the shelf out there that may be a better fit, far less effort. That can bring on another challenge as well. You know, is that group able to bring on another platform? I just don't know what that discussion may lead to. So that's an internal conversation. We want to be careful of overdevelopment. Like we mentioned in that previous case too, that was overdevelopment. There's no reason for that tracking system to be in that huge platform at that cost. It wasn't a fit. Too large of a scope or project. Janice, you mentioned this earlier in the session. We talked about these environments that have been there for 15, 20, 25 years. Are we going to lop all that off at once? In some cases you can, but I think that needs to be something we could be very careful of. We don't want to get into too broad of a development effort. And again, that goes back to making sure we're using the right tools for the business needs. User adoption, we could have a whole session on this for 3 hours.
I'm going to use this part. Someone asked a question of, and this goes back to user adoption. How do you listen to users, customers? It's so important. Listening sessions, focus group surveys, assessments. This comes to user adoption, which starts off at the point you envision you're changing your platform or changing anything. Is you do all of those, but most importantly, you need to do what is culturally appropriate for your organization. And you need to be really open and inclusive of everyone.
Great point. Great point.
But the risk is user adoption. And you see it on the benefit. But for us, where we see that biggest is when we have the years gap between, what we have today and, hey, I get on the internet and we're always talking about that with our teams. Everybody you're working with, no matter how old that system, they've touched the internet. They filled out a form. They're intuitive things that they want. So user adoption is a big risk, especially when we do things that are custom developed in that user interface.
Great points. All right, new platforms, sometimes a challenge to support. That's very, very true. And that's part of when you talk about making sure you're getting the right platform in there. Is it going to be something you can fit into the 365 environment or in Azure in some capacity? Yes, maybe. Do you need more resources there? Possibly. Bringing another third-party platform, though, that's more resources. So, I don't know, a catch-22 there in some capacity, but it does bring on another support need. Unknown costs. So we talk about this all the time. We have premium connectors. We know that the automation stack in Microsoft, there's a lot of connectors available to our teams. But when we get into, I guess I'll call it high transactions, and we're doing a lot, maybe with like an SAP or something like that. And some of those other platforms, you do start to see those premium costs come out. And we have to be careful of that, making sure that's not going to be counterproductive, I should say.
And correct. And that's where I'm going to bring in governance here again.
Governance, yeah,
Governance goes everywhere. Governance on how you use the tools, but governance on who can use which tools.
right.
And so I've seen companies, to handle the premium feature and the user adoption and the new platforms, they'll start doing like a rollout training for certain people, and then that's how they can get went off completely topic, but
Yeah,
mitigate some of these risks.
definitely. All right, so let's hit our benefits.
Everybody's dream. I get to use what I have already. I don't have to go for budget to ask for a new platform. I don't have to go to the evaluation process. I have it in-house, therefore it must be easy and it's beneficial.
Definitely.
Flexibility of the platform. That's probably my favorite benefit of this. I like to say that Microsoft's done a great job of allowing us to crawl, run, walk so many of the new processes today. For example, if I have something in SharePoint that started off small as a POC and I build a Power Automate flow, if I move the data because the process has improved, my flow still works. I don't have to redo the work. So that flexibility of not having to redo work as you evolve, very nice. Reduction of maintenance and support costs allow such a big benefit because it allows, like we talked about, departments or divisions that bear the burden of the third-party tool, they now have money to actually improve their processes or further modernize. And then a benefit is user adoption again, because depending on the people, sometimes if you're able to customize the user interface, if that scenario, and you make it very consistent with what they know to be Microsoft standards, your user adoption will not be as stringent because it's something that they're very familiar with.
Yeah, and that user adoption is funny how sometimes that works. Sometimes we have people so excited and eager to get to a new platform, and they just embrace it, and then we have the opposite sometimes. So it just depends on your audience. You had a great point about making sure we cater to the users based on all aspects, everything. A lot goes into that. Great points. All right, we do have a couple more questions. Let me cover this last. I think this is one of the last items to talk about. So when we talk about the 365 stack, we also want to take a look at enhancements. Our experience is that, especially sometimes on the records management piece, we do hear that we see more robust reporting available from our partners such as AvePoint, Gimel. AvePoint has a full feature. They do pretty much everything: migrations, compliance, and obviously migration records management capabilities. Gimel, everyone loves the UIs there. The disposition process for approvals, most of our customers like the third parties, the way they handle that. So maybe a little bit better user experience for the records managers. ShareGate, everyone's heard of ShareGate. Of course, they've expanded their capabilities to cover also Exchange. They have some reporting features in there as well. They're not just a migration tool for SharePoint anymore. Nintex, I left this for last. So we've been a Nintex partner for many, many, many years. And the new thing is that when we talk about the Power App Stack, and when our teams or our agencies have gone into a FedRAMP environment, they've sort of been, I don't want to say stuck with, but they could only use Power Apps. Well, now there's an offering now, a Nintex Workflow Cloud for government. So you now have a FedRAMP version that's available as well. So please explore that. You don't have to go with just one platform anymore. You do have another option. All right. So John, I think that brings us to, we have a couple more questions, I think.
Yep, we'll get to those questions in just 1 second, and people can open up the questions tab and post more if you like. That would be terrific. Is that the next session will be on June 12th, and this will have to do with those hard questions about costs and how cost ties to automation requirements. And so we hope that you will join us for that. And you will automatically get an invitation to that by virtue of having responded to this one. So if you go to the next slide, Scott, we'll go through some of these questions. If people have some additional questions you want to raise along the way, please just post them in the questions tab. These are all the contacts at DocPoint. If you want to get a conversation going, if you just want to say, these are the problems we're having, these are the two guys that can help you with that. And so please jot down their emails and the phone number. And I think you'll find that the exploratory conversation is really useful just to put some parameters and some barriers around the problem that you're trying to address. So a couple of the questions that I had people got from me, sent to me back channel on email is first one has to do with this process. And maybe this is a Scott question, maybe both of you, for evaluating how and where and when you can use M365 to reduce or eliminate dependencies on third-party tools. And I think some of this also gets into that issue that you were talking about, is that some of these systems have been in place for 15, 20 years and performing a very useful mission critical function for an organization, and yanking them out and putting something else in place is a big decision. How do people make that choice?
Janice, I'm going to throw that to you, but that is definitely a great, that's a great question. Go ahead, Janice. You want to take a stab at that?
Well, it depends on the organization, John. Some organizations, they're told this is the platform, make it work. Some were given the opportunity to evaluate, and part of that evaluation process, am I answering the right question?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you are. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Is first, we need to understand what those business requirements are. And that includes the security requirements, because most everything is in the cloud today. And while things are still secure, we see companies vet the security. Then you really want to look at your business requirements. Now, depending on the scope, we want to go back to those risks, because we need to mitigate the risks of too large of a project, too big of a scope, and really, first vet, does it have all the business requirements needs? Can it do what we want? Not, can it do it exactly the way I do it today, but can I get this function? Can I get disposition done? Can I get audit logging? And then when you think you have that, and maybe it's vetting two systems, I really wouldn't just dive into one. When if given the luxury, I would do a POC, quick proof of concept, doing the same system. And I know it sounds redundant, but I would pick the same process in two different platforms and, minimum viable product, and put that out for testing.
Yeah, I love the idea of the proof of concept and pilot. I think that's so important, especially when you're trying to move off a platform to another one, because everything that goes into it, as you mentioned, that's a huge, huge plus.
Well, and too many times everything is this moving train. So a company would jump all in, and then they're all in with a whole bunch. And it's really hard to now say, you've gone so far down that lane. It's best do it in small chunks, and you achieve success faster.
Yeah, good point.
I think going back to what you said earlier, Janice, about change management and user adoption, I think those use case specific POCs are really important to get everybody on board, because then they start talking to their peers, and it becomes less scary than, you're going to take away this application that I've been using for 15 years and I know how to use. What are you, crazy? Those are big decisions for people to make.
I think we've heard that before.
Well, it's surprising because, the other day it comes up all the time, but I often thought, people get new cars every, 4 or 5 years? And when I get in a new car, I have to learn where all the controls are every time. That's what happens when we do applications. Your controls have moved to different places. You're getting in a new car. We're going to go places.
I am well familiar with that, having just returned from Scotland, where I was driving on the other side of the street. And I frequently found myself, I'm used to driving a manual transmission car, but I did find myself every once in a while trying to change the gears by working the door handle with my right hand rather than my left hand. Oh, I know what you mean. Yes, change management is always always an issue in there. How about this question of how much and to what degree Microsoft? You know, this question, are people thinking hybrid? Are you seeing people going all in? You know, how are they dealing with that?
I'll take a stab at that one first. So I think we saw probably the last 2 years, a lot of people trying to go pure cloud. I think although the platform's matured, I do think we're seeing more people consider the hybrid approach. And we still have some that are not going to go to 365 yet. I think there's still a concern about security. It depends on the content that we're putting in these environments. But we're sort of seeing a mix now, especially with agencies or businesses that have a lot of automation. It seems to be they're not quite ready to move everything just yet. That's what I'm seeing. So it's a mix.
Definitely mostly hybrid.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more hybrid coming up.
And how about it's kind of a parallel question, very similar, but what advantages do you see using the Power Platform compared to a third-party solution?
I would say from my point of view, if you're trying to compare the two, the Microsoft automation that's available in the Microsoft environment is very, very capable, as we know. That's where it really, really thrives. If you're trying to talk about an advantage, I think the third parties do a better job from the outside and integration to other systems. You don't necessarily have a connector fee, a premium connector. They're usually bundled in together, and also external facing forms. A lot of our customers don't like to open up that 365 environment in any way, shape, or form. I think there's benefits when you're doing more integration with other platforms outside of your environment to use a third party. So I still think there's a need there for a little bit of a hybrid approach depending on your business needs, of course, John.
I think in every scenario, it's looking at, is this the best fit for the problem or problems that we're solving?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being with us today. And you might be able to hear in the background, I think a lawnmower is approaching my window here, which is always the way Murphy works when it comes to Murphy's Law. But I'd like to ask each of you for maybe one takeaway you want to stick in people's heads before we adjourn. And who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I'll volunteer. So a takeaway, and you're going to ask this question, John, so I prepared for it. I think I have this. I think we've seen, this relates to one of our previous questions, sort of a rush to move everything to 365. And I think there's still plenty of room and space for hybrid environments. In many cases, it's a little bit of a better approach. Our third-party applications have matured so that are more flexible now, especially in the last year. We've seen a lot of those mature. So they function both not only in the commercial areas, but also in FedRAMP as well. And also, just to mention from a takeaway, we always try and encourage teams to think ahead. We get distracted by a lot of shiny things. For people who like to shop at Cabela's and Bass Pro, you see all the shiny new things on the shelves. It doesn't always mean they're the best, because they may have just come out. It doesn't mean they're any good. You take time to evaluate those shiny new things, and just make sure that what you're committing to is actually what's going to be best for your group.
Good answer. JEANESE?
Scott and I always stay aligned. So I'm going to take his a little bit further. And when you're getting your user input, please include everyone. especially those that may not have been using the system that will be brought into it, because we've had scenarios where there were non-computer users that were now going to be part of the project. And so when you're evaluating, make sure everyone that will be part of it is included and they're equally are given the platform opportunity to evaluate.
Great.
We only have one time to get these platforms right.
Yeah, there's a lot of cost if you don't get it right. So, yep. Well, thank you guys very much. We appreciate the audience being here today and appreciate your time, and hope this was worthwhile. And please don't hesitate to drop us a line and let us know what you think and what topics you would like covered. And we'll see you the next time we talk about some of the cost of these platforms. And thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.